Washington State ferries are truly one of my favorite places.
It was really scary. So
when the pandemic shut down schools, Dolores Anchetta was like any other parent, concerned for her elementary and high school age boys and worried about how she could continue working and make sure her own children.
You are going to be after Senator Taylor.
Thank you so much.
So just have Taylor come in between you, and then Osman, I think you are after.
Yep.
And then Davis. Davis, you're up here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a bad listener.
As long as you listen to me as well. Perfect. And then
Senator Salver would be
perfect.
over here, and then Laurel will have you stand over there.
Perfect.
Awesome.
This is the lower section.
Yes. Okay, ready, guys?
So I always like to start with the service providers and end with the service providers. And I want to make sure we do systems-based and non-systems-based and working it together.
Following your lead. Thank you for rallying us.
I also like to. Oh, did you guys not get an email on the order? You guys should always do this one.
Your staff sent it a couple times, yeah.
In grades pre-K through 12th grade. Almost all of the students are tribal.
a lot of the kids respect us that way, and they come to us and they trust us and they actually care about us and we care about them.
Before COVID, students were bused from all over, including King and Thurston County, making the shutdowns all the more isolating. Elders in the community got COVID and died. Leshai's attendance numbers dropped.
Solomon.
Yeah.
And let's give Taylor a minute. Should I just check?
Generations got to work.
We've got many generations of graduates here.
Just months before the pandemic, Superintendent Mark Brulette began his first year at the district. His administration was already looking at major changes to improve student success and graduation rates. Administrators had begun a new program called Student Success. Employees like Anchetta would serve as a contact between families and the school.
They have great relationships in the community. They are well known. They knew most of the families or grandparents or brothers or sisters, and so that gave us a connection point into the homes of our students so that they could be accountable.
The first set of federal relief money went to purchase laptops for every student.
Because of our size, we didn't have to have 20,000 devices. We only needed, 700 devices to make sure all of our students.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Manka Dhingra. I'm the state senator from the 45th Legislative District, and I chair the Senate Law and Justice Committee. And on this Valentine's Day, I truly want to thank you for being part of the conversation on gender-based violence. We do know that, unfortunately, in this country, a woman is more likely to be harmed by someone she knows and loves than by a stranger. And domestic violence in Washington has continued to rise post-pandemic. It accounts for 16% of all murders in the state, more than 27% of rapes, and over half of simple assaults. Nationwide, 1 in 3 women will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. These stories these numbers tell a very sobering story about the people in our state and what we need to do in order to make sure that everyone feels safe. We need to continue to build on providing stronger protections, better services, and adequate funding. In this Washington, we are committed to protecting survivors of gender-based violence. And in this Washington, we don't want our women to become a fatality statistic. Today, you'll hear about policies we're working on along with our stakeholders to support survivors. We're truly taking a comprehensive approach to combating gender-based violence. And with this, I'm now going to turn it over to Colleen McIngles, Director of Victim Services at the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office.
Thank you, Senator Dhingra. Your tireless advocacy and relentless voice for crime survivors is inspiring. And on behalf of Lisa Mannion and the support of the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, I am honored to join today's events Standing for Survivors. My name is Colleen McIngles, and I've stood along survivors for over 20 years. Throughout the years, I've worn many hats, working first as a community-based advocate, transitioning into the system, providing advocacy to victims throughout protection order hearings and criminal justice proceedings, and now as a program director. Over these 20 years, I've seen firsthand how our method of funding victim services off the backs of offenders is failing. Our old methodology must go, and our federal VOCA fund has failed. The most recent VOCA allocation is the lowest amount in 10 years, a 90% cut since 2018. For the past 4 years, victim service leaders have come back year after year to the Washington State Legislature to help maintain life-saving services, to keep the doors open, the lights on, and shelter beds available. With the help of many of these legislators up here, our state has found a way. And yet here we are again, asking for the legislature to keep life support for these critical programs. Meanwhile, every year, program directors like myself across our state tell our dedicated, experienced staff to prepare for unthinkable cuts. Unthinkable because our staff see the faces of women and children, battered and bruised, young and old, mourning their losses, who have nowhere else to turn if these programs are closed. And yet we beg our experienced, dedicated staff in legal aid and mental health, as therapists, advocates, to stick with us through the ups and downs of VOCA funding woes. Last year, the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office filed over 5,000 felony cases. We know each case has one or more survivors in need of comprehensive, coordinated network of trauma-focused services to meet the diverse and complex needs of all victims. That number only accounts for filed cases. Hundreds of thousands of crimes go unreported, unsolved, or lack the evidence to be filed. And all suffering crime victims are in desperate need of resources and services. In my job, I'm reminded every day of the horrific tragedy and harm that crime victims survivors endure, the arduous system that they're plunged into. And yet I'm riddled with difficult decisions of which crimes, cases, and ultimately victims to prioritize with our shrinking services or cuts due to reductions. This year feels worse than ever, 51% cut. If Washington does not act, it will shatter our already tattered safety net. 2 weeks ago, a local King County domestic violence agency laid off all their legal advocacy staff. I know what is happening in King County is replicated twofold in our rural communities. There has to be a better way. This year, thanks to Senator Dhingra, Representative Davis, and many others up here have coordinated a task force to begin a sustainable plan. Passing Senate Bill 5362 and House Bill 1487 is a necessary and essential step to sustaining the life-saving services much needed in our communities. The state of Maryland did it with a much smaller population and passed a $60 million measure. Our state, the 13th most populated state in the country, is asking for a modest $50 million. We can do right by crime victims by passing this more important measure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colleen, for that and for really letting us know what's happening on the ground. And with that, I would now like to welcome Chair Taylor, the representative who chairs the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee in the House.
Thank you, Senator Dhingra. This moment in this time, we need to step up and support survivors. They come in all shapes, sizes, colors, experiences. They are men, women, children, everywhere. They are to your left, to your right. They may be your child. They may be your uncle, your aunt, your mother. We have a coordinated effort to ensure that these folks have access to the services that they desperately need, and we must meet this moment. I sponsored a bill called House Bill 1620 concerning parenting plan limitations. These are some of the most complicated situations where parents are in dispute with each other, and allegations of domestic violence, abuse, and other concerns around parents are litigated heavily in the court. And the judicial branch said, we need guidance. We need some rules that will help give us better options for the litigants and help making sure that individuals will have a consistent outcome, whether you live in King County, Pierce County, or even Pend Oreille County. This is the moment where we need to step up in terms of policy for survivors, for those who have received injustice in our family law system and in other areas of our civil legal world. We have too many people who are trying to escape their harm, and they get entangled in the criminal legal system with no way of finding redemption, no way of keeping their children safe, because we just don't have the resources. So I'm asking you all, at this moment in this time, support us in meeting the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Taylor. And I think what we're all hearing is that we need, as a community, to be more trauma-informed. And with that, I would now like to introduce Senator Tina Orwell from the 33rd Legislative District, and she's the Vice Chair of our Health and Long-Term Care Committee.
Thank you, Senator. You know, every person deserves to feel safe and not have fear of being physically or emotionally harmed. I'm honored to stand here today with my colleagues to tell survivors you are not alone. We are with you. I'm going to talk about several pieces of legislation for this session. One is around higher education. As parents, as we send students to college, we want them to be successful, but most of all, we want them to be safe. I was approached several years ago by students with a lot of concerns about support for survivors. I want to thank the amazing student voices that have really made this bill possible. Say thank you so much for your leadership. You know, we did listening tours in 3 of our universities, and we heard from students over and over again that they felt they needed more training, and that it needed to be in person, that the staff needed more trauma-informed training, that they needed like a Bill of Rights where they had an understanding of their rights when they go through the process. We know that there's a very high risk when students go to schools, especially the first year of college. So again, this is an at-risk population. This is a population that knows what they need, and I hope we can move that bill forward. The other thing I would mention is a K-12 bill we have around supporting survivors. There was a walkout in 2022. It was in Seattle and different parts of the state where students expressed that they felt when they shared that they had been harmed, that they were actually facing retaliation and blaming. And so the bill we're working on is really, thanks to OSPI and a listening tour they did with students, really making sure that that they know and have the resources they need to feel that they can report it and will be getting the services that would help them through that process. I also want to note it has bystander training. One of the top reporting of abuse is through educators, and they also need to be very vigilant of any coworker they have that might be doing grooming or other things that could be harming students. So again, we think that's an important bill. The last one I would mention is around explicit sexual images of children. This is the AI fabricated bill. It's building on the work from last year. We need to make sure that these explicit, obscene images of children are not, being shared. We know that decreases people's hesitancy to pursue children, especially offenders. And so, again, we hope we can move that bill and our state can really lead the country in this effort. So, again, I'm so proud of the work we've done in Washington. We need to continue to fund it, and we need to and will continue to stand with survivors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Orwell, for your leadership and your partnership in addressing gender-based violence. And now I would like to turn it over to one of our newest representatives from the 48th Legislative District, who's also the Assistant Majority Whip, Representative Usman Zahaluddin.
Thank you, Senator Dhingra, and to all of my colleagues, and thank you for being here today. I'm Representative Usman Zahaluddin from the 48th Legislative District, and today we're here confronting one of the most pervasive issues in our society today, and devastating to so many, gender-based violence. Each and every day, countless survivors suffer in silence. Their lives are forever altered by these horrific acts. But today, we have an opportunity, all of us in this room and all of us here, to stand with them, to give them a voice, and to give them justice. I'm honored to have brought forward House Bill 1484, a critical step toward that justice. It acknowledges a reality that far too often goes ignored. When rape results in pregnancy, the harm is not just physical, it's lifelong. It affects the body, the mind, and the future. The lifetime of trauma and consequences is one that no one should have to bear. Yet under current law, survivors under the age of 18 or over the age of 18 lack the same legal protections as those under the age of 18. This bill seeks to end that injustice, and I am honored to have brought it forward in partnership with Senator Dhingra. Now, I just want to be very, very clear. No survivor should ever have to feel invisible under the eyes of the law. House Bill 1484 ensures that justice is not just determined by age, but by the magnitude of the crime itself. This bill isn't just about laws or what we're seeing in our society on a day-to-day basis. It's about not tolerating violence in any form. It's time for change. I'm very honored to stand here with so many leaders in our community, and I am committed to fighting for that change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative. And then the next speaker is going to be someone who everyone knows as a fighter for survivors, and it is my honor to introduce Representative Lauren Davis from the 32nd Legislative District. And here you go.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to start by thanking Senator Dhingra for her decades-long leadership in advocating for victims. 140 victim services agencies that serve every county in our state rely heavily on funding from the Federal Victims of Crime Act, or VOCA, as Colleen previously talked about. VOCA is funded by large federal fines, fees, and forfeitures, which are unpredictable, rendering this a particularly volatile funding source. Without state intervention, these 140 victim services agencies will experience a 52% reduction in their VOCA funding in the upcoming year. Senator Dhingra's Senate Bill 5362, for which I've sponsored the House companion, will provide state funding to backfill the VOCA decline and ensure that those victim service agencies have stable, predictable funding and do not have to cut services or turn away survivors. This year, I'm also proud to be the prime sponsor of House Bill 1498, which will provide over $4 million per year to expand domestic violence co-responder programs in the state of Washington. Washington State has been a leader in advancing behavioral health co-responder programs, which respond alongside law enforcement to individuals experiencing a mental health or substance use disorder crisis. DV co-responder programs take the same idea, but instead they send a domestic violence victim advocate to the scene of a domestic violence call after law enforcement renders the scene safe. This ensures real-time resources are provided to a victim and impacted children, including a hotel to escape to, a safety plan, and follow-up resource navigation. Our state currently has just one DV co-responder program, Project Be Free, which operates in South King County. That program has been enormously successful. 85% of their survivors are able to successfully escape abusive relationships because they're actually provided with the resources and support to do so. I must also acknowledge a bill the legislature recently passed that absolutely devastated funding for victim services in the state. Passed in 2023, House Bill 1169 effectively eliminated the victim penalty assessment, a legal financial obligation previously paid by perpetrators of crime. The VPA was the funding source for our system-embedded victim advocates who work in prosecutors' offices, who provide crucial services for victims who've been devastated by crime and are forced to navigate our legal system, a system that was built entirely for the protection of criminal defendants. When this bill was passed, the state made a commitment to backfill the funding with state dollars, such that there would be no cuts to victim services. Unfortunately, this commitment has not been upheld. Most jurisdictions have experienced a 50% drop in funding. The Administrative Office of the Courts just released a report demonstrating this. I was the grateful recipient of these very victim services in this county that we're standing in, as I spent 2 years navigating the criminal legal system, resulting in my abuser's week-long jury trial for misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence. Because of the funding cuts, as of a couple months ago, this county is no longer providing victim advocacy services for victims of misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence. 80% of all DV crimes are filed as misdemeanors. It's imperative that our state make investments to avert massive cuts to both community-based and system-based victim advocacy services this legislative session, in addition to passing House Bill 1498 to expand domestic violence co-responder services. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep. Davis, and I'm very excited about the co-response domestic violence bill. It works in other states, and I'm glad it started in Washington, and we just need to make sure we're expanding that. And with that, I would like to now introduce Senator Jesse Solomon from the 32nd Legislative District, Chair of the Local Government Committee.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. In 2021, we changed a protection order system that was confusing and hard to navigate. Before the change, there was approximately 5 different ways for 5 different types of protection orders, and it was extremely difficult for people to use and access that. As a former child welfare prosecutor and public defender, I've seen the system from both sides, and it just doesn't feel accessible to victims. So I'm glad we made that change. As a result, we've seen a 28% increase in victims accessing this system. And while nobody wants to see an increase in domestic violence, I think it actually is a success because it indicates that people feel like they're able to use the system for protection. I don't think it's an increase in incidents. But the implementation has always, after a few years on complex bills and complex law changes, there's always technical fixes that need to be made. And so what we've learned is Senate Bill 5202 we've learned lessons from that, and 5202 will seek to rectify those problems. And so this bill will help notify survivors when a perpetrator has petitioned to restore their firearms. Right now there's a little bit of a glitch in the system in terms of the notification procedure, so this will solve that. The bill clarifies a process for minors who have been protected under an order through their parents' name. When they turn 18, it creates a process that's easier for them to keep that order in place instead of losing that protection just by becoming an adult. And it also strengthens penalties for ghost guns, untraceable firearms that are possessed by people who have abused others and are under a protection order, who are the subject of a protection order. Because possessing a ghost gun when there's a protection order out against you is an extremely concerning, dangerous behavior. So now this would make it a first-degree unlawful possession of a firearm. I'm happy to say my bill passed the Senate yesterday in a bipartisan fashion, and it's on to the House, and I urge them to pass it, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Senator Solomon. And I think we all know the correlation between fatalities when a gun is involved in a domestic violence situation. And now it is my honor to introduce Laurel Redden, Director of Communications and Policy at the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center. Thank you so much for being here, Laurel.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Dhingra, and thank you to the giants who are standing behind me for all of the amazing work that they are doing this session, and for all of your history of past work, of doing amazing work. The King County Sexual Assault Resource Center helps sexual assault survivors in their recovery and healing following abuse. Our 24-hour resource line, medical and legal advocacy, therapy, family services, prevention education are cornerstones of our work. Half of the nearly 5,000 survivors that we help each year are children and young people under age 18. We work closely with and are part of a network of statewide crime victim service providers, both in King County and across the state, who also assist victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, trafficking, and other violence that we see in headlines and in news broadcasts every day. Our collective work helps victims and families who have experienced the worst imaginable trauma and loss to recover, to feel safe, and to actually be safe in their homes and their communities. One thing I want you to know is that it takes tremendous courage for a survivor to come forward and reach out for help. We can't imagine telling a survivor to wait in line, or worse, to have them find a closed door when they summon that courage and reach out for help. And yet that risk is becoming more real by the day. KSARC and the entire network of crime victim service providers face a severe funding cliff this July 1st. The funding loss itself is one threat, but the uncertainty and the instability that we're all experiencing year after year is affecting our ability to make fundamental decisions about operations, staffing, and programming that assist survivors in our communities. The network is in its most fragile state it has ever been in. But one thing that gives us a lot of hope are the funding bills that Senator Dhingra and Representative Davis are leading. We are incredibly grateful to these legislators and all the co-sponsors for their leadership in introducing 5362 and 1487. Their bills would, for the first time, give service providers a predictable, stable floor of funding that we can count on to keep core services available in Washington communities. A critical decision is now before the entire legislature. At KSARC, we always tell victims of sexual assault that you are not alone. Thanks to the efforts of legislators here today and others over the years, we've made so many strides as a state to ensure that that remains true. We've established and strengthened victim rights, trained law enforcement, prosecutors, courts, medical providers, and school personnel to recognize and respond to trauma. We've ended the shameful backlog of untested sexual assault kits and more. We celebrated 4 years ago the passage of 1109, which gave sexual assault victims the right to be connected to community support services like KSARC to help them recover in their own community. We have made too much progress as a state to turn our backs on survivors right now. We recognize the funding challenge that the state budget writers are facing. We ask the legislature and governor to prioritize funding crime victim services. Doing so shows survivors and families who have experienced the most harm that the support they need will be there when they need it most, and says that indeed crime victims matter and you are not alone.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for all of your advocacy and your support. And I have said this, and I'll say it over and over again, we cannot balance the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable among us. I do want to do a special shout out to our youth from our colleges, from our high schools, who have been such amazing advocates when it comes to addressing gender-based violence. Thank you so much for being here and for all your advocacy. And if there are any questions, from any of the sponsors or the community providers, now's the time. We will also be sending this out, and so there'll be lots more opportunities to have this discussion. Any questions from anyone? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for being here, and we'll see you again next year on Valentine's Day. And could we get some photos of the kids? Sorry, not kids, young adults. Yes. Sorry, I'm still a mom. And let's take some in front over here.
Yes.
Thank you all so much for being here.